We had left off yesterday where we believe with absolute faith, the complete Torah which we have in our possession, it's the Torah that was given, transmitted to Moshe of blessed memory. That means every aspect, every word, every letter, every nuance of that was communicated to Moshe at Sinai, transmitted to us through the line of transmission. As it says at the beginning of Pirkei Avos, there's an exact transmission. You know, you stop to think for a moment. A child, he's taught how to read Hebrew, and he reads the word, first words in the Torah, Bereshis bara Elokim Eisa Shamayim v'Soretz. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Those words, whose words are you saying? Those are the exact words which God said to Moshe to commit to writing. It's not paraphrasing. It's exactly God's words. When you study the Mishnah, which is the redaction of the oral law, those are Judah the Prince's words. It's the words of a mortal. The words of the Torah are the words of God, the omnipotent, the infinite being. Those are his words. So when you speak those words, you articulate those words, you're saying the words that Hashem had said to Moshe Rabbeinu to commit to writing its pronunciation. Every letter, its vowel. That's what we say. Very often people quote. Most people quote, they don't quote accurately. And even when they paraphrase, they don't paraphrase correctly. We read the Torah. There's a law that when you quote the Torah and you're reading the text, you have to read it from a written text. You're not supposed to teach it from memory. So there's a whole discussion. Why? Because there's always unless something is so conditioned by man, we don't say it by heart. For instance, the Shema, the Kriya Shema, accepting, acknowledging the dominion of God. A male has an obligation to say it twice a day, in the evening and in the daytime when you rise. It's part of the written law. Yet we were permitted to say it by heart. So it's cited why we permitted to say it by heart. That since it's something which most people are well versed in, and the likelihood of not saying it correctly is remote, therefore you're permitted to say it by heart for that reason. But let's say a person doesn't know the Shema so well, and there's a chance he may make a mistake, not articulating it and pronouncing or saying it completely or correctly. You have to say the Shema from a written text. Of course, that's your obligation. But a person who has committed to memory, and many people do have a committed to memory, they're permitted to say it from memory. But everything we have, those words are God's words, and they have to be said exactly as God said them. And whatever we have is what God gave. That's our belief. Now, very often people say to you, do you really believe that? You're supposed to be an intelligent person. I mean, you're also involved with all these archaic, backward, primitive positions. What makes it primitive? What makes it primitive? Because you think it's primitive, it's primitive. You know, if you have an antique, which is 3,000 years old, and it's in the Smithsonian or in a museum, and it's worth a fortune, you say, you know something? But it's so old. It's so way back, but it's not backward. You're backward. Being from time immemorial doesn't make it backward. It makes it ancient, but ancient doesn't mean that it's not current. Judaism is current today as it was ever current. And its application is no less applicable as it always was. We always say, ignorance is bliss. But ignorance is also foolishness. Because what has infinite worth is looked upon as being worthless, and what's truly worthless is looked upon as being something of special value. The Torah we have is God's Torah. As God gave it to Moshe. Is there anything more precious, infinitely precious? These words, their value. The Creator says, I want you to study those words and say the words that I said. And if you say them, you will activate forces which are unfathomable forces. And all existence will be infused with energy, which will allow only blessing to emanate from this existence or through this existence. And believing that. And I thought you weren't superstitious. I see what kind of superstitious person you are. It's like a person, when he's younger, he doesn't have good study habits. And he goes and he shirks his responsibility, his opportunity to whittle away his life. And another person is willing to ignore them and all the criticism, and he really is studious and he makes something of himself, goes to school, and he's willing to pass on all the good times. But at the end of the day, the person who passed on all the good times is educated, and he created a life for himself and a livelihood for himself. What did the other person have? When you're young, you could somehow, as they say, you could deal with it maybe. As you get a little bit older, you can't turn the clock back. It's too late. It's too late. And therefore, for some reason, when they're 60, they think they're still 20. And they think they still could get away with what they got away when they were 20. But ultimately, it comes back to haunt you. Why wasn't I a little smarter and I should have taken advantage of what I had then, which today you don't have any longer. As I always say, in the name of Rav Yaakov Emden, the only revealed miracle which exists today, till today, is the existence of the Jewish people. There's no people in the history of this world have undergone what we've undergone, whether it's Holocausts, destructions, upheavals, displacements, levels of anti-Semitism, which is not to be believed. We're still a functional people. And somehow we always come back. There's a certain real resiliency. And we're still committed to the same belief and the same ideals and the same values. Nothing has changed. So evidently, if nothing has changed, and we still have our own same beliefs, same behavior patterns, the people who are committed to the core, which is our religion, so evidently there must be something miraculous, even though you don't understand it. There's something miraculous about whatever that text is, whatever that behavior pattern is, whatever those customs are, whatever it may be. But it's backward. Walking on your feet is also backward, because since man has been created, he's been walking on his feet. He hasn't been riding in a car, but people still walk on their feet. That's basic to be a human being, lahavdil. But this is endlessly more than that. I believe with absolute belief that the Torah's entirety, which we have today, is the same Torah that was given to Moshe by God at Sinai. Understanding that, it gives the text a whole different degree of value. It's something you revere. I was just in Israel, and a certain person bought something for another person, a gift, and this person collects manuscripts. And it's a manuscript of a Kabbalist who lived at the time of the Arizal in Sfad. It's just 2 pages of his own handwriting about something of Kabbalistic value. He paid $18,000 for the original manuscript to give as a gift to the certain person, as a gift. It's 2 pages. It was written in the 1500s by a Kabbalist, and it's his own handwriting. It's not a photograph. It's not a reproduction of it. $18,000. But if you understand its value, who that man who wrote it? What about the original copy of the Declaration of Independence with the founding fathers with their signatures on it, and so on and so forth? You know what it's worth? Why? Do you know the founding fathers? You know who they were? They were statesmen. They had foresight. They set the parameters of democracy, of civilization. One of a kind. And God's script, the Creator himself gives a script, and it's his words, and it's his text. It's backwards, it's archaic. You understand? You pride yourself. I collect loot. But that script, that's backwards. I need empirical evidence. So this guy was caught with empirical evidence. He had to give it all back. Because empirically it was proven that it was loot. And he gave it back. I believe with absolute faith. The text, the Torah we have is God's Torah that was given to Moshe Rabbeinu. Unaltered, exact, and its exact original form. And therefore it has infinite word. There's no word to describe of its infinite eternal value, what it's able to generate. Now the next tenet is very important. I believe with absolute belief, the Torah we have will not be exchanged, and there won't be any other Torah in its place from God. It's something which is immutable. It was given once, and this is forever. This is eternal. No other Torah, no other script, no other narrative. This was said at Sinai. God said, it's now and none other. But let's understand it on a rational level. We have mentioned that the Jewish soul is made up of 248 components. There's a correlation and a corresponding factor between the 248 positive commandments and the 248 components of the soul. This is cited many times by the Chofetz Chaim name of Rav Chaim Vital, who recorded all the teachings of the Arizal. Now, a person comes from a backward era, and he lives into a more advanced era. And you know something? The body needs the same nourishment in the advanced era as it needed in the previous era. No less nourishment. You know why? Because it's the same body. You need the same protein, the same carbohydrates. You need the same hydration, because that's the reality of the body. The soul is eternal. It's spiritual. It doesn't change. God created certain entities of reality that when you perform them, it infuses a component of your soul. And there's nothing else that could provide what that positive commandment provides. Because the soul doesn't change. The soul is a reality of who we are. Therefore, it will never, there's nothing in its place. Every aspect of it corresponds exactly to what our souls are. The only thing which is eternal is our soul. The body is not eternal. The body will only be eternal after resurrection, after God recreates existence, and the body the pure matter will assume a spiritual profile because it'll be meshed and coalesced with the soul. Like somebody said, how do you know? Do you know what tomorrow is going to bring? Answer is, I know nothing. I only know what God told me. And God is all-knowing, and God is infinite. That's how I know. I'm not saying I'm smarter than you or I know more than you. It's just my reality, because I know something you don't know. I know the combination to a vault, and you don't know the combination. Am I smarter than you? Not smarter than you. But I know how to open the vault, and you don't know how to open the vault. Because I know the code how to open the vault. I know truth because I am connected to truth. Because it's part of my tradition that my ancestors, when they stood at Sinai, 4 million Jews openly heard God communicate to every one of them and shared with him every piece of this information. And if he did not at that moment, Moshe, being chosen as spokesman, irrefutably as his spokesman, representing God, shared all this information with us in the name of God. That's how I know. Do you really believe it? Answer is yes, I do believe it. But I want empirical evidence. If I put a pin in you and you scream ouch or some other sound, is that empirical evidence? It's a reality. But it doesn't add up. Maybe you have to get yourself one of these Chinese adding machines. You figure it out somehow. The way they used to have the Chinese laundries when they figured it out. Every one of these tenets are basic and fundamental to have a share in the world to come. Our only key to that world to come is belief in certain fundamentals which give us relevance to God, to allow us to connect to God. If you deny certain fundamentals, what relevance do you have to God? Nothing. If you deny God, what relevance do you have to God? We have the Talmud. The Talmud is referred to as Shas. What Shas? It's an acronym for Shisha Sidorim. It's 6 sections. The Talmud is divided into 6 sections. Shisha Sidorim, 6 orders. And each order is something very specific. And there are a number of tractates in each order. In all 6 orders, we have Mishnah. We have the redacting of the oral law in the Mishnah, which was compiled by Judah the Prince, Rabbi Yehuda Nossi. But every tractate does not have necessarily Gemara on it. Does not have Gemara. And somebody going back maybe 100 years ago came up and he said, regarding certain tractates, that he found an ancient copy of the Talmud, the elucidation of the Mishnah, certain tractates which we have no Gemara, we have no elucidation. And he said he found. And he was such a genius, this person, that he was able to somehow forge it and create this. And they brought it to the Rogatchover. The Rogatchover Gaon was a level of genius beyond. He lived at the same time as Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. And the moment he looked at it, he immediately saw it was false, and he took it and he threw it on the ground. There's always someone at a certain level of advanced scholarship which will guarantee the authenticity and the accuracy and the cogency of the truth of the Torah. Always. God will never allow that anything should happen which will put the Torah in jeopardy, because God promised us that the Torah will never be forgotten from the Jewish people. But if the Torah, God forbid, could be altered and can be falsified, it's not God's Torah any longer. Therefore, there'll be always someone of a certain level of scholarship will always determine its authenticity and to maintain it and guarantee that it should remain immutable and forever. Many years ago, was a certain person who came to Yad Avram, going back 25 years ago, more. And we used to rent from the Federation a room because the numbers of people came were too large, and our original location couldn't accommodate them. Original location could only accommodate 75 people. The lecture room which used to rent could accommodate 300 people. So one day, a certain person shows up. He was a Syrian Jew, traditional, not 100% knowledgeable and observant. And I said to him, how did you come here? He said he received an invitation from JTS to go to a lecture, and he went there. And when he heard what they were lecturing on, or when he read the invitation, it said, David the dancer, King David the dancer. And that's what the lecture was on, that David knew how to dance. Okay? Among Sephardic Jews, especially Syrians, there's certain things which are considered sacred religion. It's a desecration. To refer as King David as a dancer, that's what he was. There's no way he's going to that lecture. So he happened to come to Manhattan. He walked through the door by us, and he heard some other thing. So I was once in Israel with a group of people, and I'm in the city of David, and there is a group being lectured to, a group of secular Jewish kids, college kids, and the guide, an American guide, is telling them about, it's called Ir David, the city of David. And he's telling them who David was, King David was. Not that he wrote Psalms, he's the author of Psalms. And they said to them, I want to explain to you who David was. He was an adulterer. He was a murderer. That's exactly who he was. Could you imagine? David Melch Chai V'Kayom. David, the eternal king. David, the Davidic line where Mashiach, Messiah, will come from his line. He was an adulterer, murderer. Who would want to be associated with that kind of person? Who would even want to read his text? You understand? Where's this emanating from? Total ignorance. You know, you see a policeman on the street and you never saw a man wearing a gun. And you say, who is he? What is he wearing? That's a gun, and a gun could kill. Immediately, he's a murderer. The man's a murderer because he's carrying a weapon that could kill. Maybe he's a person who's protecting society from people that they shouldn't kill. So it's due to your own lack of understanding, you immediately classify this person as a murderer, as putting society into jeopardy. Without the Talmud elucidating the text of the prophets, identifying David's behavior, there's no way, it's impossible for you to understand what that behavior was. The Talmud tells us, Kol ha'omed David choto. Anybody says that David was a sinner, ein ela toeh. He is gravely mistaken. Because if you study the Talmud, it elucidates the story of King David and Bathsheba, exactly why her husband was sent to the front. Everything. But if you don't know that, You say, you know something, that itself clearly means, and you say it the way you say it, with your and brain, that's about its capacity, trying to define something which is not reality, but it's based on your total ignorance. Now, they used to tell the story, I heard this many years ago from David Finkelstein, Oliver Sholem. He was the first shamus of the Fifth Avenue Synagogue. And it's not a true story, but it brings out a point. There was this young man, and he always dreamed that he wants to be an apikoros. Apikoros is a man who's a heretic. And there was a person, a famous world-renowned apikoros. His name was Pesach the Apikoros. His name was Pesach. And he says to his father, I would like to travel there and be mentored by him to be his primary student to become an apikoros. The father says to the son, when you reach 18, where you'll be an adult, I give you permission to travel there. But until you reach that age, you have to stay home. The son was waiting for that moment when he's able to make this trip, celebrates his 18th birthday. He tells his father he's beginning this trek to Pesach Dapikoris, to be mentored, to become a heretic. So he travels to this town and he starts asking around the town, where can I locate Pesach Dapikoris? Pesach, this heretic. Just when he mentions the name, everybody grimaces and he realizes he's not the most popular person in town. And they say, he lives on the outskirts of town. He's persona non grata here. So this only encouraged this young man even more so. I want to be a student of this Pesach de Apikoris. He goes there, he looks through the window, and sure enough, he sees a man bareheaded over a tractate of the Talmud, ancient tractate, fully immersed, with a long beard, bareheaded. And he starts glowing, this young man. This is Ace. He's arrived. Pesach Dapikoris. He knocks on the door. The man is so immersed in his studies, he doesn't even have to knock on the door. He's knocking, he feels, he'll try the door, it's unlocked, he walks in, he stands right next to Pesach Dapikoris for an hour. The man doesn't even notice him. That's how immersed he is in studying whatever he's studying there. He doesn't even know what he's studying. Finally, after an hour, Pesach Dapikoris picks up and said he's startled. He sees this young man standing next to him. So he says to him, what are you doing here? He says, all my life I've been dreaming to meet you. He says, why? Because I want to be an apikoros like you are. You're Pesach apikoros, world-renowned apikoros, heretic. And he says to Pesach, what do you say? He says, I'm studying a volume of the Talmud. So he says, okay, no problem. You could become my student, but on condition, I have to ask you a few questions. Have you ever studied tractate Bava Metzia? He says, no. Have you ever studied tractate Sukkah? No. Have you ever studied tractate Zvachim? No. He says, you want to be an apikoros? You're an amoritz. You're a total ignoramus. Apikoros means a man who studied everything and he rejects it. You know nothing, you're ignoramus. Well, the Torah itself is archaic, backward. What are you talking about? Do you know what it is? You're a total ignoramus. But you know, I could do Wall Street numbers up and down in my sleep. I could buy loot from people who are underworld people, gangsters, looters. You can't. I have connections. This person said to me, if there is such a thing as prophets, why doesn't God speak to me? So I said to him, it was time Ronald Reagan was president. I said, if you pick up the phone to speak to Ronald Reagan, would he speak to you? So if Ronald Reagan want to speak to you, why should God want to speak to you? But people are deluded. They delude themselves. If I am this, why? Total ignorance. We'll stop here, to be continued. Any comments? You're welcome to comment.